So and I actually don't know Otti or Antoinette. So how do we? What's the kind of the insights from the last 1.5 years?
Well, it's just interesting that you already say that we are failing, and that is of course amazing to us that you start with that. But let me share a little bit of the statistic. I made the work to compile it a little bit to really see where we are. And it's not so clear as you say. So we made some progress, but unfortunately, I think probably not where most of us would want to have it. So if we just look a little bit at the inner work world, and I still believe that's also core, of course, of TEAL, if we talk about mindsets and consciousness, then we have to say that the statistics are rather dire, I would conclude. So we can look at work intensification, we can look at mental health problems, we can look at stress levels. And what you have to find out is that they're still rising or just staying at a very high level. So obviously there's something not right or not going into the right direction. A little bit more mixed, and maybe that's some good news, is if we look at whether we enjoy our job. So funnily enough, but I think that was forever so, job satisfaction levels are really high. Yet at the same time, work engagement, so do we really love our job, or is it just that we're satisfied? They remain rather low. So we have to say, I mean, we don't have to take Gallup, because of course Gallup wants us to sell their consulting services, that they say only 15% are truly engaged. But then if we look at some better measurements, we are also landing only at around 25%. And I don't think that's what we wanted. And if we look at participation, or I have to get the right lingo here, TEAL lingo, peer coordination, then also we have mixed picture. It seems to be that we have some degree of participation, at least that's looking in the statistics, but then if you look correctly, it shows all of a sudden it could be just window dressing. So I found, for instance, statistics that leaders are much better in consulting and asking their employees, but they're not really listening. So real participation rates were going down. So mixed on that side. And of course, you took it a little bit already in front. If we take the more objective hard data, then I think we still have a lot of work for TEAL, for purple, for whatever. Inequity is still very high. One number which is interesting, productivity has risen 3.7 times than wages. So we know where the productivity wins have gone to, not so much to the people who have probably brought in their brain power. We still have a living wage crisis. I mean, I don't want you to be completely frustrated after what I said. So I finish it maybe with what we always like. And Otti found out the number in the US. Let's just look at CEO pay, always an interesting one. 6,400 times to the median worker is the highest pay in the US of the CEO. And in Switzerland, and you know the company, Tim, it's 308 to 1. So also not where we want to have it. Just to give us a little bit of an overview, and then the question, of course, where have we failed, or what could we do differently?
And here maybe just to add, for those who are not familiar with the work Antoinette and I did. So Antoinette being a professor in management at the University of St. Gallen, me being an ex-CEO of a large multinational, we started 18 months ago to ask ourselves the question, what is good work? What does make work good? Because I think very often in these conversations about TEAL, or as Tim said, other methodologies of organizational design or evolution, we are very often not getting the big picture. We're focusing on a small aspect, which could be, Tim said, design for autonomy, right? So we're focusing at the individual employee experience. What Antoinette describes is that work is much bigger. Work has societal implications, economical implications, organizational implications, individual agency and leadership connotations, right? So one of our first questions was, how do we actually define good work? And as Antoinette shows, everybody has their opinion and everybody has some statistics to back their opinion up. And it's very hard to actually make sense of this. And the first thing going into Tim's question of what we've learned is, if we sit down and try to define goodness of work, it becomes a very, very tough game. And I will bring up slide number 1. It's almost like being in in a courtroom, right? Here's my piece of evidence, number one. So one of the things that we asked ourselves is, okay, when we ask the question of good work, what is this word good? What does it relate to? And we went to 2,500 years of moral philosophy. And as we are writing in the article that you will find, I had the page numbers here in the booklet, which is called Fuck Purpose, right? And this provocative on purpose on page number 3. It's actually the first article. Everybody talks about purposeful or visionary or intentional, and purpose has become a big word, but nobody actually knows what exactly that is. Is that my source, the source of the entrepreneur, that what the founder wants? Is it good for the people, right? Which is kind of the bottom right. Is it about autonomy and freedom and pleasure? So what I like is good. Is it about harmony and having a good community and ourselves liking each other? And the bottom left, is it about some rules? And those rules could very well be human rights, right? Or justice in regards to how we distribute proceeds, as Antoinette says. So CEO to median pay multiples are north of 300x, right? Amazon, which was the worst case that Antoinette stated, is 4,500x. Is that in line with the rules that we want to set as a society, as an economy? Or is it about this notion of excellence, which brings in a virtue ethics connotation where, as Antoinette and I argue, it's about character. It's about who we want to become. But what we have noticed when we went into this big sea and ocean of philosophy of work, right, and then business ethics, very often even the ethics are instrumentalized. We're moving from, in the pre-Enlightenment world, a dogmatic religious discussion about the only thing that matters is the kingdom of the divine, to an aristocracy of means. The only thing that matters is money and profit, and we're instrumentalizing the workers, the stakeholders, everybody who's involved in an economy as part of this utilitarian, transactional, instrumental paradigm. And very often, and we won't dig into it here, but you will find it in the brochure, words we use like diversity, like sustainability, like positive psychology, so this notion of psychological safety, they are all to a degree distracting from the ethical questions about what makes work actually good. What is a good work that supports a good life? What does this mean? And we are moving towards, and Antoinette likes this one specifically, we're moving towards this paradigm of functional stupidity, where we're all just like happy slaves, happy cows, moving on day by day, doing what the system wants from us, blaming it on the systems, but not really taking a step back to say what is a good system.
Maybe I've just given one example, because I think we all love, most of us love positive psychology or positive organizational scholarship. And as such, it also offers a number of interesting things. But I just made myself watch again Sean Akers' Happiness Advantage, which is a really funny and nice TED talk. And he says, well, happiness needs to come before we think on performance. But what does he do in this TED talk? He then goes on and tells us, well, people who are happy are 37% greater in sales. They're 3 times more creative, 31% more productive, 40% more likely to receive a promotion. So essentially what he's saying, and maybe he doesn't mean it this way, but he says it, and I mean, I've been there as a researcher as well. I always showed that happy cows give you more milk. And then conveniently enough, he also says, and you know, it's really cheap to get people to be happy. Let them do some meditation, gratitude diaries, random acts of kindness. So, I mean, hopefully that just shows a little bit that we're often not asking the question, what is that for? Is that really good work? Or is that still just an instrumentalizing utility framework we're so often using?
And I think on top of this, especially in community like this, and apologies for being contrarian as always, but we have to be careful that we're not reifying harmony or personal freedom and autonomy. that's not the only axis, because I think Antoinette and I argue in this picture that you see here, the common good, what is good for society at large, the collective, which is what is good for the community and the relationships that we have, and the individual of the right. These three axes always have to be consciously evaluated, and ultimately we need to judge them. We cannot say, and I'm not often with the Pope of the same opinion, but Pope Ratzinger said that relativism is the big danger for modern society, because where we, like Donald Trump, say, well, whatever each of us individually likes or feels or prefers, that's truth. Well, it's not, right? There is a necessity to hold these different axes and to evaluate them and make judgments. It's not, as a leader, we cannot shy away from judgment. We need to stand up for a vision of the society that we embrace. And that is not just a question of psychological safety. And I think here, the problem is, the result of all of this is, as Antoinette says, so people are, and hopefully you will not find too many of the points on this slide that you can see in your organizations, but people use these words, purpose, sustainability, system, complex adaptive system, etc., etc. And the result is actually, as Antoinette says, we're becoming happier cows, but we're not fundamentally changing the system. And I think, again, for people like us who are in this organizational coaching or transformation, we need to make sure we're not just boxing ourselves in an instrumental space. We must ask the big questions. Why are we here? What is a good life? What is the true purpose of an organization? And I think in that regard, virtue ethics is something we really like, because it puts the focus on the moment. We, in this very moment together, are creating the good life. It's not an outcome, it's not money, it's not a rule we follow. It's about our capacity to make this moment memorable, to make it worthy of human spirit and human experience.
And Otti, before you maybe go to the next slide, now it's slides again. We wanted to have Tim really asking very tough questions to us.
Tim has disappeared.
I just saw somebody asking, so what makes us happy? So maybe you try to make a very small distinction between happiness and the good life, because I think that's a very important one.
And maybe we can use this to lead on to the next slide. So if I may use that cheeky question by my lovely colleague Antoinette, who's always giving me the difficult questions, which, by the way, you will hear in a second, Antoinette has a very strong view about as well. Happiness, right? It's the same challenge with meaning versus purpose, and happiness versus flourishing and fulfillment. These are ethical terms, right? Happiness is very often just an observed happiness. It's psychology asking people whether they feel good about their lives. That's not the same as asking a question as to whether we are realizing, and Lisa went there in the last session, of fulfilling our potential, fulfilling our purpose, fulfilling the essence of the good, the humanity that is in every single one of us. And here we try to move from this notion of happiness, which has dominated neoclassical economics, where basically we took what is called the utilitarian theory of ethics by Bentham 200 years ago, which said the only thing we should do to attain happiness is maximize pleasure, right? So maximize your pleasure, minimize your pain, that's a good life. Right, and what did the economists do? They said, that's great, so we make pleasure utility. Then we realized we cannot measure utility, so we made it preferences. That also didn't quite work out. So in the end, we made it money, and economy became the science of maximization of wealth. And here we are, right? So time is money. And we're kind of saying, no, wait a second, that's not good enough. We need to reconfigure the economy, not to maximize money and produce as much stuff as people might want. We need to re-embed the economy. And this is the idea of Genovese, 10 years before Adam Smith in 1764 or so, who suggested that an economy is a vehicle for a society to enable collective flourishing. It's a civil economy in as much as it's like a sandwich. There's ethics, which is about how do we lead a good life. There's politics, which is how about creating a good society. And the economy, the market, is making sure we all can contribute to that design. We all can do our very individual best, but thanks to the market, we can create something important together. And that logic has completely been abandoned, right? The market is the invisible hand. Friedrich Hayek and others said the market is God, right? Let's forget about any morals and any vision of a good society. Let's just optimize resource allocation and money. So I think, to Antoinette's question, happiness is very focused on my individual feeling. Flourishing is focused on the essential spirit of humanity, bringing our human potential to flourish in everything that we do. Antoinette, what's your view?
Here I completely agree. You put it in so nice words. How could I bring it into better words? But I want to take another issue up from the talk. Antonio said we also need a macro system which looks differently. And I think that's the other point we want to make here, and which you also already explained. The economy is not outside society. Ethics is as clear and as needed in the economy as it is in the rest of society. You cannot separate it. And I think if we do separate it, then we do have lots of problems. So I just give you two examples, and they're still nagging on us because we have to find answers. So Henry Mintzberg was telling us what he sees most often in companies nowadays is corporate social irresponsibility rather than responsibility. So they do a bit of greenwashing, but that's about it. And the problem is that these guys who are doing well greenwashing, they crowd out the guys who really might be doing proper corporate social responsibility. And proper for him, that was the 2.0 version, is really addressing the root cause. So being a good citizen, being a partner in this civic economy. And Paul Adler was even a little bit more extreme. He told us, forget about it completely in today's capitalism. That's just not going to work. We have such a lot of systemic lockings. We have global actors. We have oligopolies. So there's such a vast power concentration that governments are not able to regulate any longer. In fact, they will only go with the flow. And these companies are also nowadays controlling press. Some of them are even sponsoring state critical infrastructure, for instance, Amazon. So the only chance we have, according to him, is to blast everything up together and go to democratic socialism. So, I mean, of course...
Yeah, and adding to that, right? Yeah. And have a look at Paul Adler's 99% economy. Right? So this is also, we want to blow your mind a little bit from going to how do we optimize an organization or coach an individual to look at the system, but not, and our friend Tim Mooney is already challenging me on this, on the chat. Of course, the viability on this picture is not related to VSM, which is what our friend Benjamin is always talking about, very interesting from a system perspective. This is about financial viability only. And the financial viability is again determined by the market. Prices are not values. And as Antoinette says, what's the result? We create good leaders in bad organizations, they hit the wall and leave. We create good organizations in a bad economy, they hit the wall and get priced out of the market. We create a bad economy in a good society, and what happens? The society gets corrupted. And we become what Henry Mintzberg called a corporate society. Have a look at the statistics in America, right? To what degree the laws that are being made truly represent the sovereign of the people or the 1% who have the money. We have to ask ourselves these questions. Why is it that 10 people in the world, all male, by the way, 10 people own more wealth than the state of Australia as gross national product? Why do 8 families in the United States own 40% of financial assets? I mean, pardon my French, I think, Tim, we can swear, right? Swear. You must be fucking kidding, right? So we've created an economy that is creating a centralization of power and wealth to a degree that is not sane. So we cannot just stop by looking at, okay, how do we make more psychological safety in teams or whatever? That is a useful dialogue, but we need to connect it to a wider problem to make sure, as Antoinette says, we're not just creating happier slaves in a beautiful prison and are being smug about it, right? So that's our view. We think, and have a look at civil economy. It's a beautiful concept. And the way Stefano Zamagni, Luigino Bruni talk about it, it's actually really enlightening. This was one of the key things that we found, and which led us to redefine the good organizational purpose, so to speak. And we come to the comparison with Thiel in just a second. And then I will stop because Tim had some questions. I don't want to roll over the questions, Tim. I'm already kind of going from slide to slide, but
we're back in the same modus.
So, yeah, we're back in slide modus. So
we tell a little bit about the good organization purpose, and then you can fight the
go on. Yeah, take over.
So I think by what we showed you so far, you can see that we have like at least two things squarely in mind. First of all, we see good organizations or purple organizations as good actors for society. So for us, it's really enabling the good life for all stakeholders and contributing to a sustainable and just society. And then we take up what Tim was already clarifying with Otti. So profit is for being able to enable the good life of all and not the other way around. And the second very important part, and here I think we have a lot of overlap with Thiel, is that we see our organization as a guardian and trustee of employees' development to become excellent through meaningful work. And excellent here means bringing your best potential for good out. That is, it sounds a little bit poetic, but it is not so easy to do it, I can tell you. And in generating communities which helping us bringing the best out of each other. So that's the other important part.
And maybe I take the slides away to give Tim a chance to ask some questions, but this shows a three-level picture again. At the individual level, it's about flourishing. That's not the same as happiness. And someone is challenging, Tony on the chat is talking about happiness, right? But there's a difference between me just making people psychologically safe or feeling good. That is important. But what Antoinette and I talk about is nurturing the essence, bringing out the unique contribution every individual can make to fulfill their life. That's a different paradigm at the individual level than feeling good about stuff or having enough money. At the community level, that is important because, frankly, identity is relational. We can only thrive together with others. So we need to create certain norms. And this is where, Tim, a little bit our purple concept is getting distance, I think, from this wholeness, right? Wholeness is very individualistic, and you called it design for autonomy. We call it design for flourishing. Because the design for flourishing implies that we need, what Antoinette described, create a holding community that holds the individuals and allows for identity workspaces where people can experiment with who they are and who they can become. And that at the actor level, we need to make sure organizations are fulfilling their role in society, because frankly, we are the bosses, we are the sovereigns. We as a society give a license to corporations to operate. Hence, simple deal. You do what helps us as a society. If you don't, you're fucking out, right? We're going to tax the heck out of you because you have a fundamental existential accountability towards society as such. And I think that is where also companies must collaborate with each other. The problems we are facing as a society cannot be resolved by a single company. So they must create collaborations and ecosystems, but not only for the purpose of happier customers or more money, but also in their existential responsibility for the essence of life in a good society, right? So I think these are some of the thoughts that we have on our minds. Again, trying to link a very strong view on ethics, what is good, what makes a society and an individual good, with a, let's call it an emancipatory responsibility of organizations.
So now the challenge starts, because there's like a million good questions on the chat, and there's probably even more questions as soon as we get into things a bit deeper. So one thing maybe to start with, and I kind of challenge you a bit on the whole idea of, you know, good ethics, good society, and all that good stuff. I mean, isn't that our definition? You know, our first world bubble definition. We've had our consumerism life. You know, we live in wealth. We are all super good off, you know, all of us here in Zoom certainly are. Why is that the definition of good? Does it mean, you know, that other people who have maybe more existential needs, who say, you know what, I don't care if it's good for society, I don't care if it's good from a climate perspective, I don't care if it's good for whoever around me, I'm good if I survive. So and then, this change wouldn't happen, obviously, right? So these kind of, let's just say high flying first world concepts. Is
yeah,
that
well,
really what we need?
It isn't a high flying first world concept, right? So if you look at the 2,500 years of moral philosophy, we can take a global perspective on this, even if a lot of the Enlightenment certainly derives from Western philosophies and philosophers, right? But if you look at some of them, they, like Hegel, right, they looked very much into Eastern philosophies and mysticism as well. So I think this is not a question of West or East or global South and global North. No, this is a question about what's the essence of humanity. Who are we and what do we stand for? And I find it very cheap to get out of that question by saying, I am what I am and get out of my way. And someone suggested to me that a good comparison of living standards around the world is to just look at PPP, purchasing power parity, income after tax of middle classes. Yeah, frankly, that's not good enough because we have, in our belief is existential accountability for each other. But ethics is a choice. So to the degree what Antoinette and I are saying is an adult leader, and some of these leaders lead big organizations that have big impact on society and people's life. They need to possess ethical literacy. That's not even asking that there's only one answer. There's answering, you want to be a leader, you better understand this stuff, because what you suggest is a relativist position. That is one out of many, and in our view, it's one of the worst.
Yeah, I would just say on the opposite, because we are in this position, we have even more the responsibility to make a commitment towards good. I mean, I cannot see how that could be the other way around, because we can change things to the good. I mean, call me an optimist, especially if we think about the numbers. But I mean, one interpretation is that we didn't take that responsibility seriously enough. I mean, each and every one of us. What we are suggesting in the end is not a nice feel-good philosophy. It has a lot to do with suffering as well. I mean, ask me, working with Otti on that for 2 years was also an amount of suffering. But I think it's needed. I can see it in my field. I mean, if I look at universities, how we do science, we never ask ourselves, whom are we doing science for? What are our responsibilities? Who are our direct contacts and how we're inflicting them? How are we contributing to science? What can I really bring individually good in the world? These questions are just not asked. And we can see what can be done stupidly with science, just by kind of pretending or by doing really bad stuff.
And maybe because I want to get to the end of the slides, let me show you one that makes Antoinette's point, I think, maybe even clearer. I'm going to drop over the teal one for a second. What is leadership, right? And I don't know how many times I wrote and people debated, and how many, it's like a billion Google links if you check for leadership, right? And what Antoinette describes is leadership for us is an institutional role. It's not a person and their traits, it's not behaviors, it's a question of what is the type of future that the role requires, and individuals need to step into that role. You talked a little bit about guardians, or Tom von der Lubbe talked about guardian roles, right? It's a responsibility that transcends responsibility for the organization and its aims. It's a societal responsibility. So we see leadership as a systemic capacity to create a society's future. And in that regard, individual leaders play a role, but they need to play that role responsibly by understanding how everything hangs together. So how the role inside the organization, the stakeholder ecosystem, the society, the planet links. And therefore, what type of behaviors, what type of incentives, what types of structures, what types of routines, etc., are required to create a positive ripple effect that actually ultimately influences the system. And it's not enough to say it's all emergence. So emergence is the sum of our collective behaviors, and our behaviors are not random, right? They're not just spontaneously emerging like a flock of birds. They're actually triggered by the ideologies and the institutional patterns and the role models that we have inside a society. So we need to get this holistic understanding of the bigger picture for leaders that are playing a systemic role, right? And they cannot escape from this by just saying, yeah, but I like what I like. Do you want to spend another word on leadership? And I think I only have one more slide and then the question about measures, Tim, if we want to throw them out so that we can get to the other point.
I just want to not have everybody not being hopeful. I mean, yes, of course, we are telling you it's hard and we have to shape up, but I think there are also ways to shape up. And so I don't know whether we have already answered that a little bit, but I think a big concept for us is this practical wisdom. And that's in fact something you can learn. We said it's going to take a long time. And Sultan asked us whether that's just for aristocrats. Well, I mean, it's certainly only for those who really take that seriously and say they want to work on their character, but also on their wisdom. But there are things like in it where I believe we would all say this is something we can learn and maybe even do learn partially also if you look at Thiel. So for instance, it's about sensing what is the good at stake. It's just that we here also pay attention to the good, or it's, of course, we've talked a lot about thinking and critical thinking, so that's going to be a major thing. It's also about imagining. So how can I bring what I have a special to this problem, and how can I make it better in the end? And of course, it's about acting. So moral courage. How can I find that moral courage? And I think these are things you can learn, and you shouldn't learn them only at home in 1 hour or something like that every day, but you should learn them whilst working. That's the whole point. That's what we try to bring into the world.
Yeah, and indeed what we're doing is now, based on some of the knowledge that we have gathered, is create a leadership, but with a capital L. So this type of leadership as a system approach to leader development, right? Focused on practical wisdom, but also on certain technical skills, institutional skills that are required to build a good organization. And here, maybe the final content slide, we're looking at organizations a little bit different to Thiel. This is actually the table we showed last year, Tim, from the presentation we had last year, so people can look at it. But so I've already said that from an evolutionary purpose, yes, we agree to the kind of evolution, but it needs to be focused on a moral identity and character. From a wholeness, we're moving to this idea of a good life, which is actually fulfillment and not just being whole as an individual. And then, as Antoinette says, so from this notion of leaders who just enable self-management, we're moving to a slightly different model where we need to accommodate generative practices that enable individuals to flourish in community. So this could be a team, a circle, a unit, but we need to be more careful about the enabling institutions. And the institutions are the governance mechanisms, are the larger structural questions, are the decision-making processes, are the ways that the teams inside their respective area get influenced or get constrained in what they can do. And this is what I've very often experienced in Agile. We focus on the team, we're creating retrospectives, and we're making them work better together. But actually, the larger institution doesn't change. We're still paying the CEO 300x multiples. We still have performance management that uses, as Antoinette calls it, the mortality curve. We're still using the same type of processes and policies that ultimately continue this instrumental paradigm, as opposed to actually putting the whole institution in service of ultimately life and the essence of what we can become as a good people, as a good humanity. And I think maybe at this point, Tim, we could look at the measures for this.
Yeah, we got a ton of good questions, and I'm like, which ones to be choose? But I think there is. So first of all, you got some people depressed in the chat. You know, is it even possible that we get out of this? I think there is an interesting question, maybe going with that, because we also promised, you know, there's an action that we can take, and like Gary Hamel last year, I think in his talk said, well, there's no kind of evolutionary way to change that. You basically just create something new that's better. To simplify what Gary said. Anyway, but here is a question in Menti, which is, I agree that we need to go deep and not like teal wash or purpose wash organizations. But do you agree that we need a starting point, and that starting point could be actually, a bit, at the surface? And does that have a place as well? Or is it always, super deep fundamental for you both?
I think here we're going towards our proposal and where we want to invite everybody to join us, because it's the initial question, right? So we've looked at all these things, the problems with what we're currently doing, how can we become better? And I think to a degree, the challenge is how much can we do in our small, circumscribed autonomy, wherever we sit, right? So we can try, as Gary Hamel says, to work horizontally, but how far do we actually go? And we always had this idea of teal dots in an orange world, right? And Tim and I and Antoinette and everybody who's worked with us for years, we've been trying to find a way to connect these. And our view is that we need to institutionalize the connection. So yes, you can start from somewhere, but I think we need to find a way to scale. We need to find a way to collectively help each other to lift each other up, but also lift the system up together. Because the people who are in power, so to speak, and I don't blame them, it's just the power structures, they are well organized, whilst we, the hippies of evolutionary purpose, we are not very well organized. And the challenge, as Antoinette pointed out at the beginning, is we need to work at different levels. There's individual agency and maturity and wisdom, leadership development, that's important. There's institutional development of the organization as a whole, where we need to look at policies and structures and decision-making mechanisms and governance, and how do we connect to stakeholders in other companies. And there's an economy as a whole. What about regulation, right? What about the fact that in Italy, it's easier for me to fire 10,000 people rather than to find ways to keep those people on board? What about the state and the labor laws that exist, etc.? How do we work at these different levels? And our suggestion is that we need to create a vehicle where we can all work together on these different levels. And we call this, and it's going to go live next week. Oh, I should blow this up. I'm not going to blow this up. I'm going to leave it like this for a second. We call this the Leadership Society. Actually, the Good Leadership Society. So we want to create a leadership society that is creating an institutional mechanism for people to engage in lifelong learning. So a bit similar to what Dimitri described in the chat earlier as an accelerator for teal. We want an accelerator for leadership, and leadership with a small L, because like you said, everybody can share in this. You can start in different places, but you need to have the scalable capacity to then, as Antoinette says, listen to others, talk to others, work with others to increase your own capacity and your own knowledge, but also lift other people up at the same time. So we want to create this society as a vehicle for lifelong learning, for people who want to help to make the system, make the work better. And there are lots of opportunities for people to come in at different angles of this, because it should be self-managed, it should be an open platform, but it should be also linked to academic research, to best practices, to some quality assurance, so that we do the best we can do. Because if I go into a boardroom with my CEO and say, let's do this teal thing, they will laugh at me, right? They want evidence that actually works. They want backup by academia or by numbers to understand that this is the best possible thing they can do. So we need to create something that is scalable, but allows everybody to collaborate with each other. And this is our idea, to create a professional vehicle that also can allow us then to create specific, bodies that could advise governments on policies for HR or things like that, or it could enable formations of linkages between companies, etc. Antoinette, I'm sure I'm missing something on this.
Sorry, I was a little bit distracted because Tim told you that he's glad that you are moving beyond the postmodernist problem of just tearing everything down. Yeah, I mean, indeed.
Yes.
And what I think what's maybe even more important to say, I think you explained it very well, but you can see this is a large endeavor, and we really would be over the moon if we found a lot of people who want to help us building that up. So that's going to be a long years project. And maybe just why we believe it's so important to have something like a vehicle like this. If you look at research of mass movements and you see which of these movements are really able to change society, then you always find that it needs something like a common agenda. Do we find a kernel where we can at least then really say this is where we all stand together and behind it? We need some measurements. And I mean, Tim, you know that I grilled you another time because of measurements, but I didn't do it to be nasty or anything like that. But I think key measurements, few measurements, they just help us to rally behind and help us to make progress and help us to, yes, we have to sell it to the boardroom as well. And I think we need these mutual complementary activities. And that's the idea of this platform here. So there would be coaches bringing in their knowledge. There would be a research institute. I mean, I can't do coaching, no chance. So, I mean, you really need a lot of different skills, ideas, but rallying behind this common agenda. So maybe just trying to make a more passionate pledge on top of what Otti already did. And now I will quiet again.
So this is actually quite good because it fits quite nicely to one of the questions in Menti as well, which is, you know, do you really believe that employers care about that kind of definition of good life or of good organizations? And with that, I guess what you just said, does it mean you're rather suggesting, you know, that there needs to be a bottom-up kind of movement, so it's big enough that employers do care, or would you think that there's actually also an interest on their side? So what's your perspective?
Well, I mean, we do have the idea that we want to experiment in organizations and with organizations. So that's not necessarily only bottom up. And of course, the hidden plan is to get leaders from all realms of life. So in reality, we would need political leaders. I mean, I find the idea very nice to have them that they need to get a license. I mean, of course, we can't kind of start with that, but I mean, I think you need to come top down, bottom up from all directions. Otherwise, you're not going to be very impactful.
And maybe here we can ask Fabienne to share a little bit what we concretely had in mind. But I think, Tim, many do care. I think there are two challenges where, on the one hand, when in big business, right, the fact is you are hit every quarter by a necessity to do a quarterly review, and then the investors come and call you and say, okay, the share price is not going up or down in the right way, right? So I was in a bank, my CFO would tell me the other banks are firing more people, the profit is greater there, we need to do the same. And I said, you must be kidding, right? So I'm not going to fire people because another bank is making more profit. So, but to a degree, you cannot escape these logics unless you also create support in terms of finance. So you need green financing. In terms of regulation, you need to protect these people. So I think many people are well-meaning. And then let's also not forget, to a degree, we're talking here also about the next generation. It's not just us, right? I'm the old guy in the room, so to speak, right? What about the young people who will be the leaders of the future? I see many of them, right? Look at Silvio here. Why Silvio is hanging out with us and the other PhD students. A big hello to Sarah and Nelly as well. They're in here because they want to shape the future. And I have a lot of hope that they will do better than some of us have done. And we need to train them up, right? We need to give them the tools, the knowledge, the wisdom to really have the greatest impact that they can have. But maybe here, if we still have the time, Tim, can we bring in Fabienne just to invite people maybe to give a few thoughts and what they can help us with?
I mean, we got 7 minutes left and 700 questions, so we'll not get through it anyway. So I guess we can also just rather Fabienne have a quick look at that, and maybe we got one closing question for you guys for the last 2 minutes or so, which is, let me just pull it up here. So where do you think are places where you could leverage, you know, or have a real leverage at a societal level as well? So, any thoughts on that?
I think so. Going back to, I want to share this Fabienne's slide, and apologies, and also to Fabienne that somehow the audio is problematic. But you can see that the approach that we are trying to take is multi-levels. So good helping leaders and helping all those teal dots to become better at what they do, working with organizations to figure out beyond what Frederic Laloux already highlighted in terms of a toolkit for building good organizations, what else we can find, how we can deploy those things, and make that available to everybody so that we can scale the knowledge that is in this community and all the experiments that people are doing. And I think your point in terms of the good economy, right? So how can we influence the societal dialogue, but also to a degree the dialogue that's in the boardroom that the CEO needs to listen to? And to Antoinette's point, I think there are some positive glimpses, right? I don't think big leaders or very senior leaders can escape political responsibility these days, but they're also not trained to do that, right? So it goes back to helping them to actually accept that accountability on society's behalf. But what we have in mind here is we will start in a few weeks' time a dialogue to actually talk to political leaders, talk to future students, talk to economic leaders about what does it mean to create a good society? How can we influence that? We want to create a manifesto for good work and potentially also in the future make some suggestions in regards to regulation, right? Or the role of finance and see if we can work with some people. I think there is an opportunity, but it's not going to be easy. I only fear that if we don't collectively go there, we will create lots of smaller kind of B Corp style organizations that, however, will not shift the needle in the big economy. And the big companies will not go there because they say it's not scalable and we cannot do it, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we cannot escape the necessity to talk about that as well. And I think maybe this is where Fabienne was going. Our offer to everybody who is working in an organization to bring teal to life. Now we call it the Good Lab, call it the Teal Lab. We want to create an initiative that is like Otto Scharmer's U Labs, where people can register with us their attempt to create some good in the organization that they're in. And we will come collectively behind you and seek to support you with some information, with some knowledge sharing, with maybe some workshops on specific practices, with some mentoring and coaching and whatever, right? But we want to help the community here to connect the good effort. And I think maybe there's something where if the discourse starts to change, right? If people see this becomes more of it's more permitted, there's more substance behind it, more people are getting on board with it, there's credibility, as Antoinette says, from academia, there's support by some senior leaders, right? You already called Bill from Roche, for example, who's now CEO of Bayer and so on. So there's some big figures who can support this movement. I think we can do better than we've done before, right? So here, I think, as Antoinette says, our big invitation, if you think you can spare a few hours a day to not just talk, but also try to step into this space of connecting with others and trying to help to shape the discourse in society and economy, come on board, right? Let's see what we can do.
Otti, can you just leave that up for a second so everybody can take a picture, because I'm not sure that the slides are also at present available, but here you have also the email, and I think you saw on another slide where you can register, but the email functions anyhow. And it looks a little bit dubious, but this is really our email address, so don't worry.
So just in case you've never worked with Otti and Antoinette, they're always dubious. So that's not completely surprising. No, but so there is, I think Fabienne, I think was it? Yes, Fabienne also put it in the chat. There's all sorts of links in the chat. I know that we have like a million Menti questions open and probably even more on chat, although Otti and Antoinette are always good multitaskers. So we do have 1 minute left only, and then there's another nice 4 sessions. There's also a pretty interesting panel that might link back into this one here in just an hour from now, which is, talking about sustainability. And I'm sure that there will be some interesting perspective on good society as well. So you should probably have a look at that. So we'll probably have to, unfortunately, officially close that session. I think next year we should think about getting you guys on stage for 2 hours, so we have enough time to talk through it properly.
Also faster.
Or better not. I'm not so sure, Tim.
Or better not. Before just one thing, because I want to apologize for Silvio, who also is in the audience and is also available for questions. You will find in the booklet a research that Silvio did together with another lady from University of St. Gallen, on rankings, including what is called the economy of common good and B Corps. Right, so there's a big challenge with us not having the right measures that could unite us in what we're trying to do at the economic level. And I think, Silvio, again, just showing your face here to say, if people have questions about that or have some suggestions, how can we create better metrics, right? If we go to a quarterly review, we only have profit, we have some employee satisfaction. What other metrics should we have to show that organizations are becoming teal or good or better, right? This is a big piece of work. So please join in. And again, also Fabienne, again, apologies for the audio troubles, but Fabienne is trying to actually move this into concrete action. So link up with her on LinkedIn as well and make sure that, please, let's not be here next year at Teal. And again, all smoke, no fire, right? We need to move this on, not only for ourselves, but for humanity, for the goodness of work.
I think that's the best closing words we could have wished for. So next year, promise we are just going to celebrate the results and celebrate that there's no smoke anymore, or maybe more fire, at least like that. That should be enough call to action for everyone. Thank you very much to the four of you for the session. Everyone else, make sure that you follow Antoinette, Otti, Silvio, and Fabienne on LinkedIn. It should be worth it. I can say because I do for years. Always good inspiration. And then for the ones who want to stay here in this room, we have Valeria Lopez and Alistair Stewart talking about how a self-managing company evolved in its structure and governance. So we are, a bit more down to earth again, I guess, compared to some of the, what was it called from one of the guys in chat, the high-flying concepts. I think Sultan called it that way. There's 3 other interesting sessions happening as well, same time in the other 3 meeting rooms. And I know that Otti, Antoinette will be around as well, at least. I hope Silvio and Fabienne, you too. Spatial chat is always a good opportunity to catch them. From experience, late evening, Otti gets even more crazy, so make sure you're there. Spatial late evening, Central European time, always worth it. And with that, thank you very much. Closing this session, handing over the baton, and looking forward to the next one. So thank you, guys.
Stay good.
Here we go.